the tide is turning in terms of how people tell Charleston history to tourists, to other groups, that it's becoming more, Carrie and I've talked about this a lot, is it becoming more accurate? I mean, how
Yeah, it's definitely starting to change.
good?
The signage, there's a lot of new
Yes.
signage
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
marking places that are important in Black history, right?
Yeah, I can remember, and I came to Charleston set foot in Charleston for the very first time in 1975, although I've only lived here as a resident since 1992. But I can remember going down in the old antique district, Lower King Street. You'd go down there, and you could there were shops in the early 1990s that still had these little caricatured
Oh, yeah.
type of dolls. Yeah, but big red lips and so on, and you could buy those down there in the early 1990s. I was over at Historic Charleston Foundation on Friday doing a lecture for some of the docents over there. So, and we were talking at least. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about slavery, the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, free black, and how you could talk about this material and how you needed to talk about this material. And I also remember, for example, this goes back to, again, the 1970s. I took the boat ride out to Fort Sumter, and we go out there, the park ranger during the trip tells you about the coming of the Civil War and all of this. And so, first trip I made out there in the mid-1970s, the lecture is all about the way in which the tariffs caused the Civil War, led to the Civil War. And fortunately, we've got a redone visitor center over there for the Fort Sumter Visitors Center, and some of the individuals who passed through the program that you all are a part of made contributions to that Visitors Center, and the texts there that really talk about the myriad forces that led to the American Civil War, including healthy doses of slavery and the consequences of slavery. So we've seen that change. And now there's still plenty to be done, but this is one of the good things that I've seen happen just in the little consulting work that I've done around with plantation sites and historic sites. It's possible for you to go to some of the plantation sites around here and have a segregated tour of the property. In other words, you can get the tour of the big house, and then you can get a tour of everything else. So, in that sense, it's segregated. Now, one of the things I like about the Aiken Red House, for example, you go there, they start in the kitchen and that area, the woman's kitchen, and then you go in the backyard. And only after you go to those things do you go to the big house. So it's much more integrated, so you get the whole story. So we've still got work to do to fully integrate the experiences, and that only makes sense because after all, the people who lived in these places, their lives were organically intertwined with one another, and we're the only ones in the modern period that have separated them out. And so there've been a lot of positive changes. We've got a lot of things that are yet to be done, but we're certainly moving in the right direction.
The other thing I was going to mention, we got an email from someone at the South Carolina Arts Commission that they're redoing the social studies standards. Remember that email we got? And I think, okay, so they do South Carolina history. This is just South Carolina, but I'm just saying. 3rd grade, and then again in middle school, 8th grade. So I'm pretty sure, and I haven't thought about it, but I do remember that, and we actually sent something in, like they wanted some input. But it's to address so that in 8th grade, at least, they have a more realist, you know, and I forget what it said, but it's got like that, you know. So that's one tangible thing. But I mean, look, it's like the flag coming down. I mean, look what had to happen. Hello,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, really? So it should have, we shouldn't even have to, you know, it shouldn't be this way. But
But
it's definitely getting better. There's a lot of people working hard. I mean, I know Monday, a colleague of Herb's, Joseph McGill, opened up the,
TED Talk?
well, he was in Columbia. There was a conference on the slave dwelling.
I'm sorry.
You know, so, I mean, you know, just, and then Michael Allen, of course, is really involved with how, in the Park Service, with this part of our history, and of course, this museum, of course, is really gonna be an anchor for information and all kinds of programs. So, you know, you're beginning to see, and it, you know, it has to happen at all these different levels, in terms of changes, that we make. I mean, you know, of course, the systemic things like gentrification in the city, which is really moving the African-American population out in particular. There's some 20% have been pushed out since, I mean, I forget, you know, you just. Last week, yesterday. You know, all these other things that the schools, the public schools, I mean, you know, it was in June that the 3 African-American school board members walked out of the meeting because of what happened at Lincoln. Was it Lincoln or Lincoln? Lincoln High in McClellanville. And, you know, I mean, again, the point there is, if you don't put resources into a school, it is a little bit more apt to fail. And, you know, the resources are not distributed equally, we all know that. I think that's a disaster. I mean, there's many other things, but, you know, so all of these things, you know, at the state level, you know, Reverend Pinckney fought so hard to get Medicaid funding, and, you know, because he was from Jasper County. And Jim Clyburn has tried so hard. He said, look, you know, the least we can do is do some of these, take care of the people who he represented, and, you know, it's just not, really, it's not happening. So we have, and of course the gun laws, and which haven't changed at all. So, you know, and they call the Charleston loophole, the ability to buy a gun even if you have a record. I mean, you know, so all those things still, you know, that's not necessarily has to do with the history of you know, racism in terms of systemic issues,
Right.
but it's part, you know, it's all, so there are lots of people, lots of organizations, a handful of legislators, we know who they are, trying to fight the good fight.
And then also families.
Oh, the families are doing a lot of good work.
Good.
The families, yeah. And individual families, you're talking about trying to teach young people
Yeah.
about the history. It all starts at home.
Right.
So that's
That makes sense.
Other comments?
So this is a question really more about kind of the writing process, but I was kind of wondering kind of how you, whether you, I imagine you must have discussed about how you came to the decision about what you're going to call the sort of, event, really the most is the kind of the least political word to use, but kind of like I've kind of sort of there's quite a bit about sort of press coverage about it. Do you refer to it as a tragedy? Do you refer to it as a mass murder, a terrorist attack?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that was really tricky. I don't know as though we talked about that a lot, but I bet you we all thought about it. We often called it, I mean, it was tricky because you could call it all those things. You know, I always hear Cynthia Graham Hurd's brother, who's this deep, booming voice, Malcolm Graham. It was an attack on a race of people. And anyone who was of that race in that room would have been, you know, which is not what genocide is, but it, you know, is akin. I think we refer to it mostly as the tragedy, not because it just seemed like the most accurate. I don't know, but I remember the shooting.
And
the shooting, and the editors would, you know, and you couldn't keep saying that either.
Yeah.
You know, it was tricky, but certainly, I remember thinking about it a lot.
I mean, also, I think all of us,
It's a
I
good
think, had a mindset. We didn't want to over-sensationalize it.
Yes.
That was the key thing. So we wanted to do it, but still be as, in describing it, be as impactful without
Yeah.
stepping over that line.
Yeah.
I think
yeah,
mostly we
yeah,
call it the
yeah.
shooting or the tragedy.
Yeah, the shooting, the tragedy, and yeah, we thought, we said, well, this is likely gonna be the first book on the subject. There'll be others that follow it, that kind of expand on this, and there will be other books that focus on the crime itself. And since this is not a crime book, we probably used murders least frequently, and I think probably more the tragedy, the shootings. And it did have to do with the feeling of not wanting to sensationalize this and thinking about the families.
Yeah.
The families, because Herb and Marjorie are interacting with them and others, and you know, it's that's like my book on 19th century Black Charleston. It stops in 1885, although you know there are some aspects that kind of jump into the early 20th century, and people have over the years they've said, well, why don't you extend the book to the present? And I've thought a little bit about it, but you know, when you do that, all of these people who are walking around in the community, you know, you are really talking about them, their immediate ancestors, and
Tricky.
and it, you know, and people have this real emotional attachment to their Charleston, their version of Charleston, contemporary history, and all of those kinds of things. And you know, people who write about more current history deal with those issues. It's something that I've always had in the back of my mind. I've tended to.
You can't do that until you finish that A&E book.
Yes, that's right. And
We distracted.
Yeah, right.
But that's a really interesting question.
But yeah,
We
that's
had a
a-
lot.
yeah.
But again, we did have, you know, multiple editors working on this
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
And thinking about all these things. And not only that, what we were allowed to say, there were things that were pulled out. They sued the publisher, not us. There were things that we couldn't substantiate that we heard from many people, you know. So there were things like that, you know, it's not, you know, all kinds of other people weighed in, for sure.
Yeah.
They didn't mess with the manuscript
Yeah.
too much.
And you all, and one of the things that we were amazed at and heard by was what we needed to do for the newspaper citations. I mean, if you
Oh my God.
and we really
No,
during the course of
ridiculous.
writing, you know, we said at the beginning, you know, we said, well, now let's be very careful because this is the first book, and so everybody's going to be looking at it. So we want to make sure we've got everything really
Documented.
cited. We've got good sources, and so in my sections use a lot of 19th century newspapers, and so you know, in the course of recording the sources, the source information, you know, I did it the way you normally do it for 19th century newspapers.
And he kind of knows what he's talking about.
And so the editor looks at it and she says, well, what about the headlines? What about the bylines? Don't any of these newspaper stories have bylines or they have headlines? I said, well, most of them don't have bylines. And what do you need the headlines for? I mean, you don't normally cite the headlines in a 19th century paper. That's only one section. You know, it's only one section. It may only be 4 or 5 pages.
It all,
But
yeah.
they wanted that.
Yeah, yeah, it was really,
So then I had to go back and find every one of those and then add them in. And I had been the one who was really stressing, let's be really careful, let's make sure we got all the information. And yeah, yes, I couldn't believe, and I talked to the editor, I said, well, look, you know, Harvard and Yale and Princeton don't require this, you require this. And they said, yes,
Yes.
yeah, that's what we want. So that was painful.
I think it was
Yeah,
just,
that
I think it was
painful.
an OCD editor,
Yeah.
seriously,
Yeah.
or something, right?
So anyway,
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
course
well, it was a bit much, but it teaches you,
Yeah.
and we've said this to other
Yeah.
groups, when you write something, keep track of your information. Because
probably
when
take
you go
more
back,
than you need.
when you go back and you start plugging in, it make it easier, you know. Because I didn't, as a journalist, I didn't pay too much attention to citations. Although I did, in my previous book, Behind God's Back, I did cite things, but not to the extent that was cited in this book.
Oh, good.
But it's a good,
So it's unusual.
yeah, it's unusual, but of course, if anybody wants to go back and
Yep.
and retrace our footsteps, I think
Yep.
we've laid out.
Yeah, everything
that.
like text messages, what was the thing they kept on?
Oh,
I had heard,
websites too.
website, and then, you know, things that I'd written, went to, I teach right down the street from Emmanuel, and I went to just about every community, we all did, we kept trying to, and I'd write things down, you know, like Mayor Riley said that, or the lawyer in the audience said that, or Pharrell said that, or, well, what do you mean you wrote it down? I'm like, well, I was sitting there and I thought it was interesting and poignant and I wrote it down. And it, you know, some of that stuff happened to be very, you know, it was just sort of, oh, well, you know, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I said, well, what more can I tell? There was a quote from Mayor Riley that they still were asking me about. Like I said, he said it at the community, I don't know, whatever. But they were really beyond,
they're really
but whatever, we did it and, you know, they're in charge.
Yeah.